first elected to public office back in 1982, back in the days when the Democrats outnumbered us 136 to 4 in the legislature. Think about that, 136 to 4. That's how lopsided it was. Elected 4 times to the state legislature. I tend to self-term limit myself, so I left the legislature and became Madison County District Attorney. From there, went into private practice. From there, was elected 4 times to the Madison County Commission. From there, in 2010, became the first Republican elected to the United States Congress from the Tennessee Valley in 136 years. Since then, the voters there have been kind enough to re-elect me 5 different times. A point of pride in the representation I give to those that elect me to public office. No opponent since 2010 has been able to break the 40% mark in either a Republican primary or a general election. So apparently the folks that I represent tend to like the kind of job I do for them. I will tell you, I don't have much in the way of a diplomatic bone in my body. I'm rather blunt-spoken. When you guys, everybody here is going to get a chance to ask questions until the time is called. Please be thinking about what questions you might want to ask about what's going on in Washington. And I'll give you a candid response. And you'll either like my views or dislike my views, but there typically will be not much ambiguity in my position on public policy issues. Now, I want you to think about our country just for a moment. I think you can make a pretty good case that we are the greatest nation in world history, and we've held that lofty stature for about 75 years, since World War II. An economy that no nation in history has been able to match, a military capability that no one has come close to in world history, liberty and freedom that, quite frankly, is the envy of the bulk of the world. Now, you can ask yourself if we're lucky, or maybe there's something that happened that enabled us as a people to become the greatest nation in world history. And I would submit to you that luck had nothing to do with it. That the people who wrote the United States Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights, they're the ones who empowered us to be where we are. And I should add that the moral values that the founders of this country had that have carried forward to this day, those are the values that have empowered us, enabled us, guided us to do the right thing with the power that we have rather than the wrong thing. And I mention that kind of background to share this with you. Those foundational principles are under attack like I've never seen them in my lifetime in Washington, D.C. So the enemy is now within. And we have to beat that enemy in the 2022 and 2024 elections. Or else we are apt to become a godless socialist nation that many of us want to avoid, not only for ourselves, but for our kids and our grandkids. Some of the things that are happening in Washington, D.C. are just so incredible that if you'd mentioned it 10 years ago, no one would have believed you. By way of example, 10 years ago, when I was a freshman in the United States Congress, we were talking about spending a whole bunch of money that, by the way, we don't have to borrow to get, and can't afford to pay back. And I noted that we had elected too many socialists in Washington, D.C. And the net effect of that was, excuse me, this is President Trump's office.
I'm April Weaver. You may have seen some signs up and down 31 and around Chilton County that are red and say Weaver. That's me. I am the Republican nominee for State Senate District 14. Very similar to the story that Mo has. I'm kind of the girl who has a big mouth and just likes to go against the status quo. I served in the House of Representatives for 3 terms, and during that time, I supported Andrew Sorrell's constitutional carry bill. You want it back?
No, go ahead and finish.
Okay. And did a lot of things that just kind of pushed the status quo at Montgomery, and I'm very proud of that. Because last May, I kept getting the phone call from a 202 area code, and I thought it was a telemarketer, so I didn't answer it. They kept on and kept on, and when I finally answered it at home that night, it was a call from the White House and President Trump was offering me a presidential appointment to come join his team as the regional director of HHS. I'm a nurse by trade, and with everything that he had going on with all the coronavirus issues, it was quite an honor for me to join the Trump administration and be at HHS during the past year. Well, as you know, election night did not go in our favor when I left my home of 6 Mile, Alabama. Anybody ever heard of 6 Mile? Not too far from here. Okay, that's my home, born and raised in 6 Mile. When I left 6 Mile, I expected to be with President Trump for 4 years and 8 months. I'm disappointed that I was only there for 8 months, but it was the absolute greatest experience of my life working for the Trump administration. So here I am, I'm back home now, and the seat that Cam Ward vacated when he got promoted to Director of Pardons and Parole is now vacant, and I am now the Republican nominee. So for all of you who went to vote March 30th last Tuesday, thank you, thank you, thank you. I will tell you, it's just like Mo said, socialists are here, and they're closer than you think. They're here in District 14. You know, I left as a member of the Bibb, Shelby, and Chilton County delegations in strongly, strongly Republican areas. And now that I'm back and I'm the Republican nominee, I have a Democratic opponent on July the 13th, who was the Bernie Sanders for Alabama co-chair, a socialist. So that is my opponent on July the 13th here in Alabama for District 14. So I need you all to go to vote. I know she mentioned earlier that, you know, or maybe it was Mr. McKinney, each of you represent 15 to 20 votes at least. I need you to go engage conservative people and get them out to vote, because on March 30th, there were 763 people here in Chilton County that voted. 3% of the registered voters here. Y'all, that is scary. It is our right to vote, and we have to get people who think like us out to vote to make sure that our conservative district stays a conservative district. Now, I will tell you, those 763 votes were in my favor, but 91% of those were mine, and I'm very, very thankful for that. But going into this general on July 13th, she is already trying to raise money nationally from Democrats, and I'm going to guarantee you she's going to get some national money and national help just because I'm a former Trump appointee, and this is a very, very conservative area of Alabama. So there were 13,000 Democrats that voted in the last general in this district. Y'all, if we don't turn out more than 5,300 people this time, it's going to be bad. And you guys are going to be represented. We're all going to be represented by a socialist in the Alabama legislature. So I thank you so much for your support. If you have any questions for me, I will be around later. I'm going to give the mic back to Mo, and thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you. She did a really good job, didn't she? I appreciate you picking up the microphone instead of there being silence. Yeah, I have to admit, it's still kind of cool when President Trump calls or his team calls. So in the last 30 minutes, I've had a call from both of them, and that's you still get a little tingle down your spine when that happens. So it's a good feeling. I do apologize for the interruption. I do want to emphasize one thing with April. Guys, gals, don't just win, stomp the living daylights out of it, okay? Everybody you know, get them to the polls. This is an election that we should win, and we have to win, and if we stomp the living daylights out of them, maybe they'll move back to California or communist China. I don't know, just someplace away from here. So that's the kind of message we want to send in this special election that you've got coming up. And by the way, how this election goes, that will be weaponized for the 2022 cycle. If we don't win this election, then that's going to encourage the socialists even more than they already are because of what's happening in Washington, around the country, and what happened in Georgia recently. So this is serious stuff. Everybody's here taking time from their family, from their normal lives, because you have an interest in public policy, particularly the Second Amendment. This is where the rubber meets the road. So April, I want to wish you the best of luck in that general election. Let's go for 60 to 70% if we can, okay? That'll send a strong message. Now, Washington, D.C. there are so many things that are going wrong that are concerning that, as I said a moment ago, I've never feared for my country's future as much as I fear right now. And I've been in politics, studying public policy, elected office, what have you, for 4 decades. The premise of any republic is one thing: that the people control the destiny of their country at the ballot box. The socialists are attacking the integrity of our elections. Something like photo identification, which ought to be a no-brainer, they can't stand because it inhibits their ability to steal elections. Something like making it more difficult for illegal aliens and non-citizens to vote in our elections should be a no-brainer. Our elections ought to be limited to the American people, at least those who are eligible to vote. Okay? But the socialists don't like that. They have a craven lust for power. And so as a consequence, in my judgment, based on the federal government and other data I was able to get, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 900,000 to 1.7 million illegal aliens voted in the 2020 elections. Okay? I'll give you just a little bit of a backdrop on that. Government Accountability Office did a study about 15 years ago. So this has nothing to do with this election cycle. This is long ago, before anyone knew that we were going to have this kind of problem in 2020. And the GAO studied the jury pool list for federal trials. And that jury pool list is drawn from registered voters list. And they discovered that in parts of our country, as much as 3% of that jury pool was disqualified because they weren't American citizens. Which tells you that in some parts of the country, as much as 3% of the registered voters list were people who had illegally registered to vote as non-citizens. And those people, if they illegally register to vote, of course, they can also illegally vote in our elections. Let me give you another data point along these lines. This is not by accident. The socialists want non-citizens voting in American elections. And I'll take you back to the 1993 National Voter Registration Act. Is anybody here a voter registrar? No? Did you know that Section 5 of that act in 1993, after the amnesty of 1986, made it illegal for our voter registrars to require proof of citizenship when a non-citizen wants to register to vote? Think about that. No birth certificate, no driver's license that says this is where you were born in America, okay. No naturalization papers. Made it illegal to require proof of citizenship when a non-citizen comes in to vote. That's part of the problem, going all the way back to 1993. And we know that the socialists want to give up our country to non-citizens because in places in the United States of America, they're doing it. You may not be aware, but there are roughly a dozen cities that allow everybody to register to vote. You might be an American citizen, you might be a lawful immigrant, you might be an illegal alien. In those cities, you can legally register to vote for municipal elections. The biggest such city that has a total open door policy is San Francisco. That's a pretty big community. And what is, Nancy Pelosi's hometown. And what is happening is these socialists are denying us control over our own country, and in these instances, control over our own American city governments. And once you open the door, how do you close it? Because now you've got all these non-citizens voting on the people who are going to be voting on whether to allow those non-citizens to vote. It's much like felons and criminals. Having their voter rights restored, there are consequences to that. When you have Black Lives Matter or Antifa engaged in criminal conduct on a regular basis, and they vote as a bloc for whoever it is that's going to support the least amount of law enforcement, whoever's going to support defunding the police, that has an effect on the policyholders, the mayors and cities of those communities. So this is dangerous where we're headed. But that's one big thing about our republic, that it's being undermined not only by Washington, D.C., but the socialists around the country. So we have to restore honesty and accuracy in our election system, and there's going to be a fight to get it done. But our last chance, in my judgment, is in 2022 and 2024. So if you want to engage in this fight, please do so, because it's your country. And if you don't fight, know that you help participate in the loss of it, because I promise you the socialists, they're fighting tooth and nail. And if one team's fighting on the gridiron, the other one is still in the locker room, who's going to score? So we need to sacrifice as our ancestors have sacrificed. Many of them sacrificed their lives so that we could have the privileges that we enjoy in the United States of America. I don't know if you've done a head count, but over 1 million Americans have lost their lives in combat for their country since the beginning of the Revolutionary War. That's a lot of sacrifice, and we need to honor that by fighting for the principles that they died for, and by fighting for those principles in the next election. Now, there are some other really crazy things they're doing. We used to take advantage for granted the Bill of Rights. I mean, it's been in our Constitution since 1789. Now, freedom of speech. How dare you exercise that right where you disagree with the socialists? Okay? They're going to retaliate against you. Just run through myself, where I had to give a speech at the Ellipse on January the 6th. I've had ethics complaints filed with the House of Representatives by these socialists. I've had a lawsuit filed against me. By the way, the co-defendants are President Trump, Donald Trump Jr., and Rudy Giuliani. I've kind of wondered whether I need to disclose that as an in-kind campaign contribution, because that's a good group of defendants to have with you. They've filed a lawsuit against me. They have threatened criminal prosecution because of the speech I gave at the president's request, albeit indirectly through the White House communications director, or no, political director, excuse me. They have threatened to expel me from the United States Congress. There is a resolution that has been filed to expel me from the United States Congress. The Bar Association. I haven't paid dues to the Alabama Bar Association in over a decade. I thought that meant I wasn't a member anymore. But there have probably been at least 10 to 20 different complaints against me with the Bar Association to have me disbarred because I fought for honest and accurate elections, and because I gave a very inspirational speech on January the 6th at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C., where I talked about the things we needed to do to win the 2022-2024 elections. And I wanted the whole world to know that we were American patriots, so that when those folks marched to the United States Capitol, that they would chant USA, USA, USA. By the way, that's all I asked anyone to do at the United States Capitol. But all these things are because I had the audacity to exercise the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. I don't know if you've felt it yet, but they're going after people's livelihoods. They want to fire you from your job if there is a person or business who supports a candidate that believes in our values. They threaten those businesses with loss of income in order to cause that employee or that business to quit supporting conservative candidates. So they're trying to dry up the campaign contributions. These socialists are serious about what they're doing. Freedom of religion, the same thing. That's one of the foundational principles, moral values that guide us to do the right thing with our power rather than the wrong thing. The socialists want to kill freedom of religion. That's where they want to take us. Because moral values, the belief that our rights and the Bill of Rights come from God, not other people, philosophically, that is a big difference. And so they're doing everything they can to force any moral values on us. These guys are so nutty, I should say guys and gals are so nutty, they don't even know the difference between a man and a woman. I mean, think about it. They're saying that a man who pretends to be a woman can compete against women in college athletics, taking that scholarship, taking that playing time away from females. That's crazy. To quote the socialists, that's science denial. Okay? But they have power. And it's one thing for a man to pretend to be a woman. If you're in a land of liberty and freedom, they have the right to that pretending. But they don't have the right to make the rest of us like it. That's infringing on our liberty and our freedom, particularly our freedom of association in the First Amendment. So this is all serious stuff. I mean, they're attacking the very root of our belief system. Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. That's been under assault for a long period of time. And that is what has brought y'all together as a particular interest that you care about and you're willing to fight in elections for. But they're going after that full bore, and if they could repeal the Second Amendment right to bear arms, they would do it. That's how dedicated they are to what they're doing. Now, you may say, well, Mo, what is it about these socialists? I mean, aren't you exaggerating a little bit? I believe that history is an excellent instructor. And I think it's very important for us to look at what socialists have done in other nations that they have conquered so that we can get an idea of their degree of commitment and what we risk in America. The first such socialist nation was Russia. We had the falling of the Tsar, the revolution, followed by the Soviet Union with Stalin and Lenin. They executed more than 10 million freedom-loving Russians after they took power. Look it up. There's plenty of information about it. Murdered them solely because they would not submit to a dictatorial socialist government. Rather, they cherished their liberty and freedom. How about another one? Well, the 1920s. The National Socialist German Workers' Party. Now, the socialists will say, oh, that's not us. Those are Nazis. What do you think Nazi stands for? Nazi, N-A-Z-I, National Socialist. That's an abbreviation for the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And if you think they aren't socialists, go to their 1920 party platform. That tells you what their belief system is, and they are socialists. Now, to the extent you can raise an argument that they're fascists, well, fascism is the twin sister of socialism. They both are dictatorial. They both deprive us of our rights. They both strip us of our ability to defend ourselves and fight for our country, to fight for our liberty and freedom. And what happened in Germany? Well, internally and externally, tens of millions of people died, not only in Germany, but also because of World War II and the expansionists of what the National Socialist German Workers' Party tried to do. If that's not enough, how about let's look at Communist China? That's socialism, folks. It's a little bit different governmental model, but the economic model is the same, and the principle of denying people their liberty and freedom is the same. Well over 10 million people were killed by Mao Zedong and his socialist buddies. If that's not enough, look at Cuba, look at Venezuela, look at North Korea, look at Vietnam. Just go down the list. That ought to impress upon you how dedicated our political foes are to turning us into a socialist nation by looking at the history of what they've done elsewhere. So we've got a fight on our hands. The good thing about this fight is I believe there are still enough Americans who are patriotic, who understand the risk, and who share our values for us to win these elections in 2022 and 2024. But that will only happen if we stand tall and communicate with everybody we know about the advantages of free enterprise, the strongest economy in world history, the most amount of wealth in world history for any nation, versus socialism. And if you need a good contrast point on socialism, look up Venezuela, because that's ongoing right now. You want to see how bad inflation can get? Wait till you get inflation that's over 100% per year. Excuse me, 100,000% per year. That's pretty doggone bad inflation. So you can have that kind of contrast. You want to see what happens when you have an economy that collapses because of socialism? Look at the studies that have determined that over a 2 or 3 year recent period of time, Venezuelans had a net weight loss on average in excess of 20 pounds because they couldn't get the calories needed to sustain their body weight. That's socialism. That's what happens when your economy collapses because the socialist model does not work. And let me emphasize this one thing before I open up for questions and answers. Socialism as an economic model has never worked in any nation that has ever tried it in world history if the definition of working is an adequate safety net and an adequate national defense. Having those two is what free enterprise has done for America and enabled us to be all that we can be. So that's my report from Washington, D.C. I apologize that it's not real fun and games, but we're in a serious situation because for too long, too many Americans have not been paying attention to the threat of the socialists and their agenda and how hard they're fighting, even to the point of being willing to steal elections. So that having been said, I'll open up for any questions anyone may have about Washington. The floor is now yours.
That the threat is right at your throat. And your mouth is the key to overthrowing. Now, I sound angry. You damn right I'm angry. Because everybody wants to sit on their friggin' hands and play games with this. It is not a game. It is your country. It is your life. It is your family. It is your future. Get up. Do something. Woo.
Hoorah! Yes, sir, over here and then right over here. And is there anyone over there that has a question? All right, then y'all too.
Good and well that the soldiers stayed in a lot worse, and they were just proud to have a shelter over their heads. But you got somebody that is open, wide open to all the pleasures of a hotel, and then you drag somebody away from their family to protect them when you want, and you stuff them in a concrete building. What's wrong with that?
A lot.
And what can we do as citizens, now that I was paid and everything, and I took an oath to defend, now what can we do now?
We are, as of this moment, the question is what can we do to stop this kind of stuff? We are, as of this moment, still a republic. So that means the destiny of our country is in our hands. And what we have to do is get active. Either be a candidate for one of these positions, if you're dissatisfied with what's running, or contribute money to those candidates to offset the money that the socialists are getting. By the way, you may not be aware of it, but even our incumbent United States senators were getting badly outspent in 2020 by the socialist candidates. Badly outspent. Incumbent United States senators who normally have the capability of raising a ton of money. Volunteering your time on behalf of the candidates that you share values with. But it ultimately comes down to the American people are responsible for the mess we're in because by definition, the American people are responsible for what we elect. And so we have to get more vigilant and we have to fight for our republic if we're going to keep it. So that's what it comes down to.
Now, Georgia passed a voter
Stronger voter laws.
stronger voter laws. That's it. They passed stronger voter laws to stop the kind of crap that happened in the 2020 elections. And you know how to stop it? Don't buy a Coca-Cola product. Don't fly on Delta. Don't fly on American Airlines. When you start boycotting the people that are pouring the money into the socialist agenda, then they lose. Until you do that, you pissing out the back door.
Well, he makes a very valid point. The socialists, and this goes back to 30 or 40 years, they have figured out how to weaponize economic activity. And to a large degree, they extort money out of businesses that aren't acting the way they want them to act, particularly in a political sense. And we need to figure out that that's a big weapon and we need to be duplicating it. I know it's hard, okay? But like Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NFL, it's bad enough that we created a monopoly for them. You know, Birmingham has wanted an NFL team, a professional team for a long time. But Congress has passed legislation that bars Birmingham from getting a team unless the NFL consents to it. In a free enterprise situation, there wouldn't be that kind of monopoly set up, and you'd have competition much like we do with the NCAA. Another bad thing about these sports teams is who is it that builds their offices, those nice arenas and stadiums? Taxpayers do. So not only do we create a monopoly, we also subsidize them to an egregious degree. And then you've got them deciding to politicize things. And the NBA in particular has kind of fallen in love with the Communist Chinese Party.
Yeah.
But they complain about what's going on in the United States of America when in Communist China, roughly 90% of their population is enslaved to the will of the Communist Party. And these folks are hypocrites. And I thought one of the most interesting hypocritical points brought out was, if you buy a ticket over the internet and you show up the ticket booth to get your tickets, you got to show photo ID. Think about that for a moment. But when it's determining the future of our country, our destiny, they want to make it easier to cheat. Now, I'm going to talk about the elections in one particular context that I would love for y'all to take to heart and read this one document. This document is from the Commission on Federal Election Reform. Commission on Federal Election Reform, 2005. Co-authored or co-chaired by Democrat President Jimmy Carter and Republican White House Chief of Staff under Ronald Reagan, James Baker. And they wrote about a 100-page report on the systemic flaws in our election system. So this isn't 2020 where there's a big battle over who's going to be president of the United States and who's telling the truth and who's not. This is 15 years earlier. And they identified 3 major systemic weaknesses in our election system. One was the lack of photo identification. Gosh, wasn't that a problem in 2020? Another one was non-citizens voting in our elections. And another one was mailing out of ballots through absentee ballot systems or others. And what the Democrats did in 2020 is they examined this report and they decided to use it as their game plan. But the question I want to ask y'all is, what in the world happened between 15 years ago and today where suddenly all of that voter fraud and election theft activity that this bipartisan report examined and concluded existed and that they warned against suddenly was gone? What was their motivation 15 years ago to create falsehoods about voter fraud and election theft that the news media now says doesn't exist?
Yeah.
We didn't pass any laws that fixed the problems. So look at that report, and anyone in the fake news media or any socialist Democrat who says no fraud, no fraud, no fraud, like they were a parrot, ask them about that report 15 years ago and why they said otherwise. And perhaps if you really want to get to the end of the report, ask them what they thought about this Commission on Federal Election Reform warning us that in a close election, these flaws will make the difference. It's almost like it was written to explain what was happening 16, 15 years later.
I see on TV that the Republicans in the House are pretty much in lockstep.
Pretty much, about 95% of us.
The Senate is the part that bothers me.
Senate is very weak-kneed. We had 2/3 of our Republicans in the House that voted for honest and accurate elections on January the 6th. 2/3. Only about 14, 16% of the Republicans senators voted for honest and accurate elections. That's a big delta. 65% more or less, 15% more or less. That's a huge difference. In the Senate, we have far too many that didn't do their homework and were too weak-kneed to stand up on principle and do the right thing for their country. And you'd have to ask them why they didn't do the right thing.
I just wanted Washington's opinion, what I thought I was seeing was correct, and I guess it is.
And who else had a hand up over here? Was it gentleman with a mask on?
But y'all remove it, so you won't have to say who is that mask. Let me also stop hiding behind that. One of the things I keep hearing the word socialism. I'm just against the name games that Democrats play. I mean, in the Jeffersonian era, I would have probably been called a liberal, yet they claim that mantle. You know, socialism is the smiley face sticker that communists put on themselves. I'd actually prefer it if the Democrats would keep referring to themselves as progressive, because it brings to light all the specter of, you know, Margaret Sanger, eugenics, the absolute racism of Woodrow Wilson. Right? So that's, I mean, I call them, they're a communist. You can play whatever word game you want. You know, I call people out. I don't play those games. But my real question is, House Bill 1. You know, there's two ways that citizens such as ourselves can affect change in the government. One of them is the ballot box. And unfortunately the other, and I don't say this as hyperbole, is the ammo box. And that makes people get very nervous when I say that, but that's, to me, it's undeniable, like saying the sky is blue, water's wet. You know, if that bill is rammed through, that is the end of the republic. I mean, the gun rights won't matter at that point when every Guatemalan and Honduran gets to vote for more and more government, more and more, as de Tocqueville talked about, government largesse. That's the end of us if that bill passes.
You're well read, by the way, when you start quoting de Tocqueville. For those who don't know, he was a French political philosopher from the early 1800s who prophesied that America was doomed to collapse the moment that a majority of the citizens realized that they could use the government to take other people's money and give to themselves. House Resolution 1 is what I call the Voter Fraud Enhancement Act. It, at the federal level, eliminates all state efforts for honest and accurate elections by federalizing the election process under Article 1, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. It is a very, very dangerous bill to our republic. I'm not willing to say that it's time for the ammo box. I still have hope that in 2022 and 2024, the ballot box is the remedy. But Americans, if you look at our history, we have a history of fighting for our liberty and freedom. You know, we didn't get it for free. We had to fight in the Revolutionary War, a war that lasted 7 years. More if you go back to 1775 with Bunker Hill, Lexington, and Concord. More if you go back all the way to the Boston Massacre and the Tea Party. So I hope that's not where we end up. I urge everybody to fight in an election setting in order to take back our country. But I'll tell you, we got to start electing people who are not Republican squishes. Because we have too many Republicans who are squishes, particularly on border security issues. Particularly on border security issues. Any other questions or comments?
I got one.
Well, we have one here and one over there in the yellow shirt.
we have more criminals in Washington DC that need to be in prison. And I'm very disappointed in our Attorney General this past term. Mr. Bill Barr seemed to have been a man that would have stood up, and there's laws that could have been used to handle the crooks that are in government. But something happened, and it, just like the illegal election, it slipped by. So people have got to stand up. People have had enough, and men like Mr. Mo Brooks, our President Trump, there's millions of people that was ready to stand behind President Trump and defend him. I was ready to give my life. Our grandkids and children in this country is gone if we don't do something about it. The Clintons, the Bidens, they got by with so much, and the attorney generals, the ones that's in office, have not done their duty. And when they let foreigners come into our country, they're committing treason, and it makes them traitors. So that's the way I feel about it, and I think there's a lot of other people that's had enough.
Thank you for your kind remarks. As you decide what to do, always bear in mind that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Right.
So we have a chance in 2022 and 2024 to right the ship. And if we're unsuccessful, well, that's when the price goes up quite a bit. There was a gentleman in yellow shirt.
Argument here, considering our former president, our president right now, is threatening to take action in his own hands, which I would deem to be unconstitutional, but that doesn't seem to carry a whole lot of weight anymore. What in your mind is that, I know voting and all like that, but of course we're in between elections, and I'm afraid we need to do something now before election will happen. Is it a better way to maybe right now do an old-fashioned letter campaign, an email campaign, try to jam up their email accounts?
Can everybody hear him? He's talking about the Second Amendment right to bear arms, the President of the United States unilaterally engaging in anti-Second Amendment conduct, and what can we do between now and the elections to try to save the Second Amendment, okay?
Yes.
Letter writing campaign on this issue with the Biden administration does no good. Zero. Your best hope is to litigate and then hope that we have judges and justices that will respect the United States Constitution. You have no other remedy other than to win elections in 2022 and 2024 that would put right-thinking people back in charge of our federal government.
Second part of that, I've been doing executive actions. He can do an executive action in a matter of days.
The President Biden can do executive action in a matter of days, but that does not make it legal. That's where the courts come into play, and that's why it's so important over the decades to have elected better senators and better presidents who collectively would nominate and appoint, confirm lawyers who would actually respect the Constitution and obey their oath of office. And we've had a dearth of that on the United States Supreme Court. Too often they like being lifetime policymakers instead of reading the exact language of the Constitution and statutes and applying it as our elected officials desired and intended.
What would be
Changing the Supreme Court takes a lot of time. If you keep the numbers at 9. You know, there has been an effort by the socialists to increase the number beyond 9 in order to stack the court and put socialists on the Supreme Court, which in turn would undermine the Second Amendment. Hopefully that will not happen, but that is one of the things they're pursuing, and if they think they can get away with it, they'll do it. I mean, they have this grabbing of power right now, and they see this as a tipping point. It's House Resolution 1, which is the Voter Fraud Enhancement Act. It's Joe Biden promising amnesty and citizenship to 15 to 20 million illegal aliens, however many there are, who then can vote for Joe Biden and the socialists. So, I mean, they're going all out at the national level to take our country from us. And by us, I mean patriotic Americans. Doesn't make any difference what your skin pigmentation is, your ethnicity is. All of us, this is our country. But we have to respect the foundational principles that have made us the greatest nation in world history, or we're going to go into the dustbin of history. And it's going to be a lot of suffering that goes with that transition from greatest to dustbin. Was there another, yes sir, question?
But how can we, as plain, ordinary citizens, how can we do anything about the illegal voters that has stolen this country so far?
It comes down to what we send to Washington. Washington is counting this. Now let me be real clear about who the opposition is on border security. It's not just the socialist Democrats. It's also the Chamber of Commerce and the big businesses that would prefer to hire cheap foreign labor over American citizens. And so it's a double whammy on that. This is the number one priority of the Business Council of Alabama. This is the number one priority of the United States Chamber of Commerce. And they spend tens of millions of dollars each election cycle trying to elect congressmen and senators who don't care a twit about the average American worker. And that's a big problem. So we got to counteract all that money on the Republican side that unfortunately influences a lot of Republican votes. It's communicating with people you know and just keep building the numbers that agree with you. And the communication comes down to campaign contributions that help pay for a message of that candidate get out. It comes out to your putting up yard signs in your own yard, your family's yard, your friend's yard, saying this is the person to get behind. It comes down to knocking on doors, social media, Facebook. It comes down to all these things put together. That's what it comes down to.
What is it, 401c3, 401c4, that you either have that or you're not tax exempt. But
501c3, 501c4, and all. But I'm not an accountant.
All right, but now here's the thing: it silenced the pulpit, because if you speak out against the government from the pulpit, we'll pull your tax exempt status. Don't tell me it does not work that way.
My understanding of the law that the Republicans passed about 3 years ago is that churches are now allowed to speak from the pulpit on political matters so long as it relates to the values of that religion. Okay, so now that's still kind of a fine line. And there are some churches that seem to get away with going way beyond that line, while others can't. And I don't know what to do about that. But if my memory serves me, my staff is, when she taps on the watch, that means my time is up. But thank you so much for allowing me to be with you here today. And please, this is your country. Your country needs your help. Do what you can with the resources you have, time and money, to make sure that your values are properly represented in the 2022-2024 elections. God bless.